Hi, welcome to Ask Tim, the insurance technical podcast brought to you by IAFNI. I'm your host, Tim Dodge, and I'm coming to you today from Studio 3A here in the Stephen T. Dooley Conference Room, deep within the bowels of IAFNI headquarters. And I'm joined today I have a special guest joining me on the set of Ask Tim. Only the second time in history that we've had a guest host, because frankly I don't like sharing the limelight. But today I have the queen of continuing education, our very own Dee Macheda. Welcome to the show, Dee.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's very nice to be here.
We are going to talk today about something that comes up a lot in the phone calls that I get and that Dee gets from IAFNI members, and that's the subject of motor vehicle records, MVRs. And there are a lot of questions from members about when you can order MVRs, when you can give them to your customers, what you have to do to give them to your customers, what restrictions there are, what the law says, and all that sort of thing. So I want to start out. I'm going to talk about the major federal law that applies to MVRs, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about what might be in your contracts from vendors, and then Dee is going to chime in on some privacy concerns. So the Driver's Privacy Protection Act restricts departments of motor vehicle from sharing personal information about the person named on the record. And personal information is things like the person's name, their address, not including their zip code, their photograph, their driver's license number, their social security number, non-public information like that. So the DPPA says that the DMV cannot give that information to somebody else unless that somebody else has a permissible use. What's the permissible use? Well, the DPPA lists 14 of them. For our purposes, the ones that our members are usually concerned about are insurance purposes, rating, underwriting, etc., and sharing MVRs with their clients who typically are asking to see the driving records of their employees who are driving company vehicles. Now, both of those are permissible uses under the DPPA. It specifically says that the DMV can give that information to somebody using it for insurance, underwriting, or rating purposes, or for claim investigation purposes. And it is also permissible for the DMV to give this information to an employer who's checking the driving records of that person's employees. Where it gets tricky is that a lot of times we know that IAFNI members are asked to obtain MVRs by their clients. So the client will say, can you run these 20 MVRs on my drivers and then give them to me? So this is a service that you're providing for your clients. This can get messy because it might be legal. It is legal under the DPPA to share this information with somebody else who has a permissible use. So I, Mr. Insurance Agent, have a permissible use to order these MVRs. You, Mr. Employer, my client, also has a permissible use. Therefore, it's legal under the DPPA for me to give these MVRs to you, Mr. Client. However, there's other documents that might weigh in on this that make it not quite so legal. And Dee, why don't you talk about that for a second?
Well, it really goes to the DPPA, the part of the law that talks about reselling the information. And you as the agent, when you order them and give them to the employer, that's one thing. But once that employer turns around and uses them to perhaps fire an employee, to perhaps demote an employee, you're considered to be a reseller of that information, and your contract with either the DMV or the
vendor.
The vendor, thank you. The vendor who you get your MVRs from, such as Experian or Equifax or TransUnion. In the contract, it specifically usually states that you're not allowed to give those MVRs to anybody else. You can get that contract amended through the DMV in New York. There's a memorandum of understanding that can be filled out and approved. With your vendors, you need to go back to them and have your contract either amended or reissued to allow you to be able to order the MVRs, turn them over to the employer, and then the employer has the ability to use them.
So this is a situation where the federal government says you can do something, but your contract with a private party says you can't.
Correct, yeah.
Isn't the Fair Credit Reporting Act also implicated somehow in the MVRs?
It is. Fair Credit Reporting Act, which has been around since the 1970s actually, part of it states that if you're going to order either MVRs or if you're going to order a credit report on somebody, you have to get their permission. You have to first advise them not only that you're going to order, but that you might be ordering MVRs or a credit report on them. The individual has to sign, usually on, I believe, both the personal auto and the commercial auto applications from ISO. No, not ISO. Accord. Yes, excuse me. The Accord applications have a generalized statement advising that the insured understands that those documents might be pulled. Otherwise, it's always good, instead of just getting a verbal authorization from the client, always get a written authorization to verify that the insured understands that an MVR or a credit report will be pulled on them, and what their recourse is if there's some adverse action on their report.
And you should know that in the research section of the IABNY website, the guidance and research section, we have a page just on MVRs. There are links there to a document prepared by the Big I legal staff, which has some of these sample authorization forms that Dee was just talking about. And that's available for you to download right now. There's also links to a couple of good articles from Big I Virtual University. You will need to log in with your My IABNY user ID and password to access those articles, but one is called Sharing MVRs Legal But Not Permitted, which is what we were just talking about. And then there is another one called Warning, Furnishing MVRs to Your Insurers May Be Hazardous to Your E&O Policy, and that gets into some of the Fair Credit Reporting Act issues that we were just talking about as well. So I really encourage you to take a look at the MVRs page in the research section of the IABNY website. You can also find and download the complete text of the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which lists all the permissible uses and what you can do with that. One other thing I want to mention about the DPPA is that if you do share the MVRs with somebody else who has a permissible use, like one of your clients, you do have to keep a record of that. The law requires you to keep a log of what you shared, who you shared it with, and when. So that's something you need to keep in mind. If you need to get in touch with me, you can find me at my email address, tdodge@iabney.org. You can give me a call at 800-851-8853. Send me a fax at 888-432-0510. Every once in a while, I remember to log into AOL Instant Messenger. You can find me there as tdog4494. You can find me on Twitter as Ask Tim and send me a question that way. And your comments and questions are always welcome on the blog that accompanies this podcast. I want to thank Dee for joining me for this episode of Ask Tim. She was a little, there was some trepidation there because there is this minor, overblown concern, that sometimes I've been known to toss something, while we're doing an episode of Ask Tim.
Yes.
But she's been a good sport about it, haven't you, Dee?
Yeah, Tim.
Thanks for watching this episode of Ask Tim. We'll be back in a few weeks with a new episode, and until then, if you want to know how to scare your fellow employees out of the conference room so they'll not show up in your podcast again, don't forget to Ask Tim.
Finally.